Look at it. The Twilight Zone it's a place of imagination, a land of shadow. To reach it, you write a dream. To enter it, you need only your imagination.
Picture this. A television episode so controversial, so deeply uncomfortable, that an entire network decided it was better off erased from existence. Not pulled for a week. Not delayed for editing. Gone. Completely wiped from syndication for over 50 years, while every other episode of the same show became required viewing in film schools, living rooms, and late-night marathons across America. No alien. No time traveler. No haunted house. Just two men, one attic, and a story so politically charged that the people who ran one of America's biggest networks decided the safest move was to pretend it never happened. This is the story of the Twilight Zone episode that television buried alive, and what it says about the America that forced it underground. Before we go any further, if you love digging into the hidden corners of TV history, hit that like button right now, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, share this video with someone who grew up watching The Twilight Zone, and drop a comment below telling us your all-time favorite episode. We read every single one. Now let's step into the fifth dimension. To truly understand why one episode of The Twilight Zone caused a firestorm that lasted half a century, you first have to understand the man who created the show and the battles he fought just to get it on the air. Rod Serling wasn't born into the entertainment industry. He was born on Christmas Day, 1924, in Syracuse, New York, and grew up in Binghamton, a small, modest town where his father ran a grocery store. By all accounts, it was a quiet, unremarkable childhood, but that quietness was shattered the moment Serling turned 18 and volunteered for the United States Army. He didn't end up where he expected. Instead of fighting in Europe against the Nazis, as he had hoped, Serling was deployed to the Pacific as a paratrooper. What he witnessed there, particularly at the Battle of Leyte, left marks that no amount of time could fully erase. He came home with a purple heart, a damaged knee and wrist, and a mind full of images that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Then, just as he was trying to readjust to civilian life, his father died suddenly of a heart attack. The double weight of wartime trauma and personal grief would have crushed most people. For Serling, it became fuel. He enrolled at Antioch College in Ohio, where he met his wife Carol, started a family, and threw himself into writing with a kind of feverish intensity that never really let up. He was writing in between classes, after dinner, in the early hours of the morning before anyone else woke up. The stories poured out of him like pressure escaping through a valve. By the mid-1950s, Serling had established himself as one of the sharpest dramatic writers working in American television. He won Emmy Awards. Critics praised him. The industry respected him. But respect didn't mean freedom, not even close. Television in that era was controlled not by network executives in corner offices, but by the corporations that sponsored the programs. Advertisers had extraordinary power over what could and could not be said on screen. A car manufacturer could demand that a competitor's vehicles be physically removed from the background of a scene. A tobacco company could insist that characters only ever lit cigarettes, never matches. The creative vision of a writer was considered far less important than the comfort of whoever was writing the checks. Serling found this environment suffocating. He had real things he wanted to say about war, about grief, about the cruelty and beauty of being human. And every time he put those things on paper, some executive or sponsor would sand them down until they were smooth and meaningless. The moment that broke him came when he tried to write a serious television drama about the 1955 murder of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old black boy from Chicago who was brutally killed in Mississippi. The case had devastated Serling. He felt compelled to respond to it through his art. But the networks wouldn't touch the subject. Sponsors wanted nothing to do with racial controversy. By the time the inevitable rounds of revisions and compromises finished, the story bore no resemblance to what Serling had intended. That experience lit a fire in him. If the networks and their sponsors couldn't handle reality when it was presented directly, Then he would smuggle reality in through the back door. He would dress it up in the language of science fiction, fantasy, and the supernatural. Censors didn't seem to mind when the character being discriminated against was a green-skinned alien on a distant planet. They didn't object when the commentary on war was delivered through the mouth of a robot or a ghost. The metaphor gave him cover, and he used it brilliantly. His first major step in this direction was a story called The Time Element, a time travel narrative about a man who travels back to 1941 Honolulu with desperate knowledge of the coming attack on Pearl Harbor. The network shelved it initially, considering it too unconventional, but when another producer rescued the script and got it aired, the audience response was enormous. Letters flooded in. People wanted more. CBS had no choice but to offer Serling his own series. The Twilight Zone premiered on October 2nd, 1959. And from the first episode, it was clear that Serling had found his method. He could say almost anything he wanted, as long as he said it in a world that technically didn't exist. What makes the story of The Twilight Zone so extraordinary is that the show came remarkably close to being canceled before it ever became a cultural institution. Looking back now, knowing what the series became, it's almost impossible to imagine. But the truth is that The Twilight Zone spent much of its original run fighting for its own survival. The ratings were respectable, but never spectacular. Finding a sponsor willing to attach their brand to stories about alien invasions, dystopian futures, and supernatural punishment proved consistently difficult. Network executives were uneasy with the show's tone, its unpredictability, and its refusal to offer easy comfort to its audience. James Aubrey, a senior executive at CBS, reportedly had little patience for the series, and when the show stumbled at the end of its third season, the network canceled it without much hesitation. In its place, CBS aired a sitcom called Fair Exchange. It failed almost immediately. Within a year, the network was back, asking Serling to revive his show. He agreed, but the conditions attached to the revival nearly destroyed what made the show special. For the first 3 seasons, episodes had run for 30 minutes. Tight, focused, punchy, exactly the right length for the kinds of twist-heavy stories Serling and his writers were crafting. The revived 4th season forced those stories into 60-minute slots. The results were, by most accounts, a disaster. Stories that would have hit hard in half an hour felt padded and sluggish, stretched to double the length. Serling, already working at an exhausting pace and writing a significant portion of the scripts himself, was visibly worn down. Season 5 returned to the half-hour format, but the audience had drifted away. The energy of the earlier seasons never fully returned, and the network finally pulled the plug for good in 1964. The show had lasted 5 seasons and produced 156 episodes. Of those, the vast majority went on to become classics of American television. They appeared in syndication, in textbooks, in cultural conversations spanning decades. There were remakes, revivals, tributes. The phrase Twilight Zone moment entered everyday language as shorthand for an experience that felt strange, disorienting, or uncanny. But one episode from those 156 was missing from almost every rerun package, every syndicated bundle, every holiday marathon for more than 50 years. One episode had been quietly removed, not with fanfare or public explanation, but with a kind of silent, institutional erasure that happens when powerful people decide something is more trouble than it's worth. The episode is called The Encounter. It aired on May 1st, 1964, near the very end of the show's final season. In terms of production, it's a relatively simple story. 2 characters, 1 setting, 45 minutes of increasingly intense psychological confrontation. Fenton, played by Neville Brand, is a World War II veteran living with the accumulated clutter of a long and troubled life. Arthur Takamori, played by a young George Takei, years before his iconic role on Star Trek, arrives looking for work as a gardener. The 2 men end up together in Fenton's attic, surrounded by the junk of memory and guilt. At the center of that attic sits a samurai sword, a weapon Fenton took from a Japanese soldier he killed during the war. What begins as an awkward but seemingly ordinary interaction between two strangers slowly transforms into something far more volatile. The sword, the script suggests, carries a kind of supernatural charge, a malevolent energy that strips away pretense and forces both men to confront the ugliest corners of their own histories. On one level, the episode is doing exactly what the Twilight Zone always did best, using a supernatural object to externalize internal psychological truth. The sword becomes a metaphor for the unresolved violence and unprocessed trauma that war plants in people and refuses to let go of. The attic becomes a space outside of ordinary time, a pocket of reality where the normal rules of social decorum no longer apply, and where hidden wounds are forced into the open. Thematically, the intentions are clear enough. Serling and his writers were trying to examine how war damages the human soul, not just the soldier who fights, but the communities caught in the crossfire of hatred and historical violence. But the execution crossed a line that the Japanese-American community found deeply offensive. The script includes a plot element suggesting that Arthur's father had been a spy or a traitor during the attack on Pearl Harbor. This detail was not only historically unsubstantiated, it was the kind of accusation that had been weaponized against Japanese Americans to justify their forced internment during the war. Tens of thousands of American citizens of Japanese descent had been stripped of their homes, their businesses, and their freedom based on exactly this kind of suspicion. To see that suspicion echoed, even fictionally, on a nationally broadcast television program caused real pain. The timing made it worse. The episode aired in 1964, as the United States was deepening its military involvement in Vietnam. Tensions around Asian identity, American foreign policy, and the legacy of World War II were all running high. Japanese-American advocacy organizations responded to the broadcast with swift and forceful objections. CBS, unwilling to fight that battle, quietly removed the episode from circulation. And there it stayed. For over 50 years, the encounter was essentially a phantom. Film historians knew about it. George Takei, who was generally proud of his Twilight Zone work, acknowledged its absence with a mixture of relief and regret, noting in interviews that the missing episode meant missing residual payments for decades. But for the general public, it was as though the episode had simply ceased to exist. It finally resurfaced during a New Year's Day marathon broadcast in 2016. Over half a century after its controversial premiere, American audiences could finally see the episode that had been locked away. The conversation it sparked was exactly the kind of uncomfortable, necessary reckoning with history that the Twilight Zone, at its best, had always been designed to provoke. Here is the deepest irony buried inside the story of the encounter. Rod Serling created the Twilight Zone precisely because network censorship had prevented him from telling honest, uncomfortable stories about race and prejudice in America. He built the entire framework of the show around the idea that the only way to get the truth past the gatekeepers was to disguise it as fantasy. And yet, the most censored episode in the show's entire history wasn't suppressed by a nervous sponsor or a timid network executive uncomfortable with social commentary. It was pulled because the social commentary itself caused harm. The metaphor didn't protect anyone. It amplified a damaging and false narrative about a community that had already suffered enormously. This doesn't make the episode without value. It remains a fascinating and genuinely disturbing piece of television, full of raw energy and genuine dramatic power. George Takei's performance is remarkable, intense, nuanced, and emotionally honest in ways that were rare for the time. The claustrophobic atmosphere of the single-room setting creates a pressure that the episode sustains effectively right through to its violent conclusion. And the underlying intention, to use two men and a haunted object to excavate the psychological wreckage of war, is entirely consistent with everything the Twilight Zone stood for. But the specific details chosen to construct that metaphor caused real damage to real people. And that is a tension that even Serling's most devoted admirers have to sit with Honestly, when does the use of another community's pain as dramatic material cross from empathy into exploitation? These are not simple questions. They don't have clean answers, but they are exactly the kinds of questions that the best version of The Twilight Zone always pushed its audience to ask: uncomfortable questions about the gap between who we think we are and who we actually are. Serling himself was aware of this tension. He spent his entire career trying to hold two things at once: the conviction that art had a moral obligation to confront ugly truths, and the humility to acknowledge that the line between confrontation and harm was not always clearly visible in advance. He made mistakes. He also made masterpieces. Often, as with The Encounter, it's genuinely difficult to say which category applies. Rod Serling died on June 28, 1975, at the age of 50. He had suffered 2 heart attacks within weeks of each other, his body finally giving out under the pressure of a lifetime of extraordinary creative output. He was gone far too soon, before he could fully see the extent of the cultural legacy he had built. That legacy turned out to be enormous. The Twilight Zone became one of the most influential pieces of American popular culture ever produced. Its DNA is visible in almost every significant work of speculative fiction that followed. In the films of Jordan Peele, in the anthology television resurgences of the 2000s and 2010s, in the social commentary science fiction that has become one of the dominant modes of contemporary storytelling. 3 separate attempts to revive the series have aired in the decades since the original ended. Jordan Peele's 2019 version, in particular, was explicitly modeled on Serling's approach, using genre trappings to smuggle in pointed observations about race, power, and American self-deception. The ghost of Serling's method walks through every episode, but no revival has managed to fully replicate what the original had, which was the sense that the show existed in genuine tension with the world around it. Serling wasn't just commenting on American society from a comfortable distance. He was fighting the network, fighting the sponsors, fighting the censors, fighting the clock, and fighting his own demons, all at the same time. The friction was part of the energy. The Encounter, for all its flaws, is a product of that same friction. It's an episode that tried to say something true and important about the psychological aftermath of war, stumbled badly in how it represented one specific community, paid a heavy price for that stumble, and ultimately survived to be reassessed in a more complicated light. The Twilight Zone was always at its best when it made you uncomfortable, when it showed you something you didn't particularly want to see about yourself, your country, or the world you thought you understood. The Encounter does all of that, just not always in the ways its creators intended. The story of The Encounter is more than just a curious footnote in television history. It's a window into the messy, unresolved business of what it means to use art as a vehicle for social truth. Rod Serling built a show specifically designed to challenge the comfortable silence that powerful institutions preferred to maintain. And in one of the great ironies of American broadcasting history, the episode that cut closest to the bone wasn't buried by a sponsor or a network executive. It was buried because the community it tried to speak for rejected the way their story was being told. 52 years of silence, one New Year's Day marathon, and a conversation that is still ongoing. The Twilight Zone taught us that the most frightening thing about the unknown isn't its strangeness. It's the moment when the strange thing turns around and looks exactly like us. That's a lesson worth sitting with. If this story got under your skin the way the best Twilight Zone episodes always do, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves the weird, dark corners of TV history. Subscribe so you're here the next time we pull something unexpected out of the vault. And most importantly, drop a comment below. What's the Twilight Zone episode that has stayed with you the longest? The one you still think about? We want to know. Because the conversation, just like the Twilight Zone itself, is never really over.